April of 1848, a group of men were walking towards the coast of King William Island, which is an island located in the freezing Arctic region of northern Canada. These men were members of the Inuit people, who are indigenous to King William Island. They were making their way towards the coastline to see if they could find any seals that they could hunt and kill. However, they couldn't actually see the water because there was this huge icy hill that obstructed their view. As these hunters got closer, they kind of peer up and over the hill and they looked down below. They saw kalunat, which is their word for white men. But these men were not acting like people. They were lumbering and they were all just staring straight ahead with these vacant expressions. Their skin, it was like black and blue. Now, for these hunters, all they really knew is that white men were pretty dangerous. In addition, few of them were dragging this big sled, and there was a tarp over the sled. They hear this awful guttural scream. Many of the kalunat were lumbering along, but one of them had stopped and he was kind of retching around, and then he just crumpled to the ground. But the other white men didn't even react to it, except for the men pulling the sled. They pulled the sled right up alongside this man who pulled back the tarp, revealing all sorts of bodies, and they threw him onto the pile. They covered him back up with the tarp. At this point, the Inuit hunters ran back to their village. When these hunters had gone back to their village to tell the others about what they had just seen, the consensus became go back to that same spot, find these kalunat. So the hunters, they go down to the coastline and they just start tracking the footprints of these white men. After hours of this, the hunters come upon this campsite. There was the remains of a fire, and sitting over the fire was this big pot. One of the hunters walks up to the pot, and when he saw what was inside, he reeled back in horror. Several months later, that same group of Inuit hunters had hiked until they saw this big wooden ship. Their plan was to break into the ship and raid it, because just recently they came across this mass gravesite, 30 plus white men all dead in the snow. Once they got on board the ship, they quickly realized the ship was in pristine condition. Just off the kitchen, in their pantry, was this massive food storage room full of food. The reason for this would not fully make sense for another 130 years. It was in the 1980s when researchers began to analyze the remains. Those men were explorers who had been sent out to the Arctic by the British government. What these explorers didn't know is that their canned food had become tainted with lead. They were slowly poisoning themselves, and one of the side effects, in addition to feeling nauseous and horribly sick, is it drives you crazy. All these men decide to abandon their ship to forage for food. They found death and misery. That sled they were dragging along, it was like their mobile refrigeration unit. The reason those hunters were so horrified when they looked inside of that pot was clearly a human skull, and that skull had been cracked open as if it had been scooping in, eating this person's brain. Bones of the crew members are still being found on King William Island.